Hello, hello, welcome everybody. My name is Scott Maier. I'm with Artist Network, and this is Drawing Together, where we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, to draw together. So this is what we're working on today. This is a beautiful piece of pie. It's been on my mind lately. So a lot of fun to draw. I learned a lot doing this preparatory one that I hope I can kind of address in this session. And what I'd like to do is kind of take this a little bit farther. Looking at this now, I feel like there's just some additional detail that I think could really bring this to life. But all in all, I think it's kind of a fun subject to work on. And in particular, there's the element of texture, which I'd like to focus on and see if we can really capture the variety of textures in this subject. So if you're following along, you're going to want to find the reference image in the description below. You'll find a link for it. You'll also be able to find a link to the show page where you can share your work when you're done. So if you have any questions, comments, just want to share your experience, the live chat is below or next to the video here. So I'd love to see where you're all viewing from, whether you're drawing, if you're using the same materials or different materials. I see a lot of familiar names here, so welcome everybody. Let's see, JC is saying it's not easy to find the class. Any thoughts on that? It used to come up right away, and now you're having a hard time finding it. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that to see why it's not showing up, but perhaps that is something that we need to address. So tell your friends, bring a whole group of you together to draw with us. If you do have any questions, it's helpful to call them out in all caps. So I have the screen up here off to my left. That's what I'm looking at. I also have the reference image up here on the left. And I'm going to do my best to address everything. But like I said, if you type it in all caps, I'm more likely to see it. So let's get started. What I have today that I'm working on is some cotton rag paper. This is the Hahnemühle rag paper that I've been using quite a bit throughout this first season. Let me grab this real quick. What I did this preparatory one on is actually, it's the Derwent Lightfast paper. It's kind of designed for colored pencil, but I think it really works really well for charcoal. But I thought I'd just kind of switch it up and see how this paper works. If you have regular charcoal paper, that'll work. Actually, regular drawing paper in general, I think should work for this. I think this is going to translate to graphite very well as well. So let's see. Erasers today, I'm introducing this. This is a kind of an electric eraser that I used in the preparatory one to help pull out some of the finer details. But I also have this slim eraser that I've carved down into like this sharp edge, and that'll help give me a little bit more control as well. In terms of the charcoal though, I'm going to keep it really simple. Just one stick of vine charcoal, just this one medium charcoal pencil, and I'm going to see how far that gets me today, plus my trusty blending stump. So if you're, like I said, if you're working with graphite, I think you can follow along just as well. I think it might be helpful to use some of the softer graphites if you can. That'll translate a little bit more and perhaps give you a greater range in terms of value. So let's get started. This is an 8x10 sheet of paper that I have here. One of the things that I kind of rushed through in the preparatory one was really laying out the drawing. This is a relatively simple subject. It's just a piece of pie with a little dab of ice cream there. So there's not a lot, there are not a lot of subjects there, but I didn't really take the time to plot out its position on the page. And so I want to take a little bit more time to do that. And so I'm just going to start with a quick gesture. This is kind of in the way right now. Just a quick gesture, just to orient myself, reacting to the subject, moving my eyes back and forth quickly from the reference photo to the subject, just getting information on the page. We talked a lot about this throughout the series. Is this initial stab is just about getting information down, and then once it's on the page, it's a little bit easier to then make decisions about where it needs to be adjusted. What needs to happen in terms of the proportions. But sometimes what we'll end up doing is trying to figure that all out in our heads while looking at the reference photo, and then and then kind of executing on the page. I like to do the thinking on the page, kind of thinking through the subject while drawing. So that's generally my philosophy here. I want to start to block in some just basic value relationships, so just using the side of the charcoal here. I do have a piece of smooth paper underneath this to help smooth it out a little bit. You can see how blotchy that is. We'll see how that works out. It may be maybe trouble later on, but it's kind of natural for for this kind of blotchiness to happen in the early stages. But I just find if you continue to build up values, kind of filling in some of those spaces, it'll ultimately going to smooth out. So one of the things that I want to start to think through as well is the relationship between the positive and negative space. So the shape of that background being the negative space, and the positive space being, the pie, and kind of shifting back and forth between those two modes of thinking. This is fine charcoal is giving me a little bit of trouble. It's starting to scratch the paper a little bit. There we go. So just switching it around to the other side, you can see it's a lot smoother. Some of these, sometimes with the vine charcoal, you can get these kind of rough spots. So I'm not being super careful with this background. I just want to start to get some basic values down. Kind of prioritizing the negative space in this first pass. And I know a lot of artists that will kind of maintain this type of energy and pace throughout the entire drawing, keeping the freshness of the kind of the gesture kind of alive, and that might be something that you consider as well. Sometimes we kind of take it as a given that we want to do a high level of detail, and that can sometimes kind of confine things a little bit and limit our range of expression in our artwork. So if you are one who's kind of more inclined to create kind of highly detailed drawings, consider just loosening up for this one and see what it does. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to commit to that approach forever, but it can sometimes kind of expose you to new kind of ways of working with the materials. So, Pat's saying also having difficulty finding the class. So I'd like to hear more about that. How do you normally hear about the class? Is it through the Artist Network newsletter? Is it on the website? Do you just go to the YouTube channel? Kind of curious to see how people discover it. Yeah, if you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, hopefully it gives you notifications. And I know it goes out on our social media channels as well. And you can always go to the Artist Network website, and then there's underneath video, the main navigation, there's going to be a video tab. Underneath that, you'll find Drawing Together listed. And if you go to that show page, it'll have information about upcoming episodes, as well as all the past episodes. So, all right. So what I'm trying to do in this initial stage too is think very generally about the subject and about the basic value relationships. The idea that this is relatively kind of dark under here. We get this thin white band. We get this somewhat rectangular shadow here, a dark background, a kind of triangular light. So thinking about it in those terms, thinking about it as shapes rather than a piece of pie. So what we're doing is we're building that foundation so that by the time we get to the end, we can really focus on the textures and the individual characteristics of the pie that really make this kind of a distinctive subject. But at these initial stages, if we just focus on them as kind of abstract shapes, it can sometimes help us set the stage a bit more effectively. One of the other things I'm trying to do is kind of unify the form shadow of the pie and the cast shadow here. So making one shadow shape. This really kind of scratched up the paper, which is interesting. So I don't know how well you can see it, but this vine charcoal had some imperfections in there that I guess are ended up just scratching up the paper. So we'll see how that works. Could lead to something cool. All right, Jerry is saying you subscribed. Awesome. Yeah, so if you go through Artist Network, you'll find the show page. It'll have the embed for the YouTube channel. You'd have to watch on YouTube in order to participate in the chat. So, all right, that's interesting. I need to figure out why these episodes are not being kind of highlighted more clearly on Artist Network. And so this is an interesting thing too. You can see nothing is happening. I just hit this kind of dead spot on the charcoal. So if you do that, if you're working with vine charcoal and you hit a spot where it's just not making any marks, just keep rotating the charcoal. So like right here, for example, it's not doing anything. I don't really know why, but if I just turn it a little bit more, eventually I'll find a nice soft spot for it. So with vine charcoal, it's either willow or it's grapevine that's been fired in a kiln, reducing the oxygen so that it creates the charcoal. It doesn't just turn to ash. But it's a natural substance that can bring with it all sorts of kind of fun irregularities. So, okay. All right. Don't want to draw this. We want to eat it. That's the goal, I think, if we can make a drawing that you want to eat. So, all right. So now that this is blocked in, let's see, what do I want to do? I think I'm going to pull out my eraser. I'll wipe this down, pull out my eraser. You can see how quickly, just with the palm of my hand, just kind of laying down some kind of value there. I'm going to use my eraser to do some subtractive drawing, and now really kind of focus on the shape of this upper portion of the pie. And this is a fairly light pressure. And I'm really trying to think about drawing with this material. It's not an eraser is not just a tool for correcting mistakes. It's the way I view it, it's a mark-making tool. And I like to kind of wipe it all down like I did there to help to unify the drawing. It puts everything in a position where they feel like they're a part of one drawing. And then I like to maintain that unity because it's easy once we start to focus on details, it's easy for those details to overwhelm the drawing and overwhelm the form. And then it makes it more difficult for the viewer's mind to really make sense of. So as I'm kind of working down this way, I want to figure out where that shape of light for the plate should go. So kind of mimicking or kind of practicing those marks, thinking about this shape, thinking about the negative space, thinking at the point of which along this back edge that plate emerges, kind of dropping that down. So we've talked about that a lot in the series as well, as the idea that when you're drawing and you're making your marks, what we're doing is we're kind of splitting our attention. So before I make a mark, I'm doing a quick check-in. Where am I relative to things above it, to the left, to the right of it, just scanning the whole thing and seeing where am I relative to all these other points. And it may be a little kind of clumsy at first, but as you get used to doing that, it starts to become second nature. And in just a kind of a split second, you can do a quick check-in and have yourself oriented on the page properly. So one of the things that's helpful here is that I've talked about this before. I have this drawing table that has this, I've attached this piece of wood to it, and it's parallel with the paper, and it allows my hand to kind of rest on that, give me a little bit of support. And so with this mostly horizontal mark here, it gives me a little bit of, like I said, a little bit of support for that. But I also need to recognize that it's not a perfectly straight kind of horizontal mark. There's a slight curve to it. And then I need to kind of visualize this path, that back edge of the plate, as it passes behind the pie there and it comes out this side. I want those to line up from left to right properly. And then I'm just going to erase this out as a solid shape, just not creating a distinction between the ice cream and the plate. So what I'm going to try to do is to visualize the general shape. And then try to, within that, start to make it a little bit more precise, more specific. And I think it's important, similar to drawing the clouds we did a couple weeks ago. It's really easy to kind of fall into a sense of rhythm with the mark making and create like these nice perfect bumps in there. So you really want to think about making those marks irregular. Take some time to really study that shape, and even if you don't match the shape, that form one-to-one to the reference photo, look at it from the perspective of kind of irregularity and kind of a rhythm, an irregular rhythm to those forms, rather than a consistent kind of repeated form. And I kind of say that a lot of that is for my own benefit, because that's the trap I fall into all the time. I have this natural inclination to create these kind of evenly spaced marks and kind of rhythmic marks that I have to then kind of intentionally override later in the drawing. So I'm happy right now with kind of the sense of light that's emerging, and in some level I feel like it could be I could almost stop at where I am now. This now is kind of a bit of a no-tan, kind of a black and white version of the composition. But I think it's an encouraging thing to look at this and feel like, hey, I understand what that is so early on in the drawing. So Michelle is saying, draw much slower. Yes, I do tend to draw a little fast, and I try to encourage myself to slow down. so don't try not to compare your pace of drawing to others. Everybody works at their own pace, and I used to always really admire other students in my classes who would really take their time, because I would just kind of rush through it and just be done, and I'd be relatively happy with my drawing. But I see these other artists really sticking with it and coming away with just amazing drawings, and I was always kind of jealous of that ability. So sometimes I've had people seem to speak as though drawing quickly is a benefit to drawing, and I disagree. I feel like it's hurt me more than anything, but it's just my natural inclination to work more quickly than average. So let's see. Let's see, a bit of sap. It's a bit of sap. Yeah, bear down on a scrap piece of paper to wear it down. So Paul is giving us a good suggestion on working with divine charcoal. Those imperfections that are in there. If you do, I actually have a scrap piece of paper here, but you can kind of work through some of those rough spots. You can hear it scratching to get to a nice smooth spot. For me, I don't get too caught up in kind of perfectionism, but if it is something where, like you said, you can see I've got these kind of scratches here. If that bothers you, then yeah, I think Paul has a great suggestion there for working with those irregularities and the imperfections. So, all right. Let's see, just checking other questions. Well, some of you might want to get caught up. Okay, what do I want to do now? Asking myself that. I think what I want to do is kind of now just continue that same basic process of now shifting my thinking back to that background, but now refining this edge along here. Before I do that, I want to kind of evaluate. I guess I feel like I feel pretty confident in the overall proportions, you know, the width versus the height, the scale relationships of the main features here, and we'll adjust those a little bit more. But I think what I want to do now is grab my charcoal pencil here, and I'm going to keep using the side of the pencil as much as I can, so that I don't have to go back to sharpening it. You know, this sometimes I just feel really lazy, and I don't want to sharpen my pencil. So my process is to utilize the side of the pencil so that it's always keeping that sharp point. So as I look at that kind of negative space in there, I'm not going to think about those sugar crystals across the top. I'm going to use my eraser to form those. I want to think about that general path there. So if I do any marks along here, I want to keep it really light because I don't want them to be a line. If anything, I want to prioritize these vertical marks in the background, so then it creates a visual differentiation between that horizontal path of the back of the pie and then those vertical marks back there. That becomes a clue in the viewer's mind that those are two separate objects. If I run these marks this way, so it's paralleling the back of the pie, it starts to confuse the viewer's mind into thinking that they should actually belong together, and then it starts to see them as being part of the same shape. So really considering the direction of the marks can make a big difference in how we interpret that visual information. And if you're not really kind of sure what direction mark to make, using circular marks can really be helpful. Yeah, those scratches there, those are really holding that charcoal. That's all right. I know, at least for me, I kind of like, I like it when surprise things happen in the drawing. And so I don't like to control the drawing too much. Let some surprises happen. See what you can learn from that. So as I make these vertical marks, I'm trying to prioritize the upstroke. It kind of looks like I'm drawing back and forth, but I'm putting a little bit more pressure on the upstroke to kind of feather things away, because I don't want there to be kind of a dark halo. You know, if I start to really create this dark space around this back edge, then what happens is it creates this dark halo that flattens out the drawing. So we want a really nice smooth gradation back there. And then as I work on this background here, I'm rolling the pencil in my fingers so that I'm keeping this core relatively round. Trying not to get any flat spots there. And then this is going to get darker up here. But I think I'm going to leave that be. So then I actually have a space to work on to help me sharpen my pencil later when I need it. So what I'm doing here is, rather than starting at that edge and then kind of feathering it out, I'm going to start by filling in this background and try to kind of start from this space and work my way down to find that edge. So I'm doing a little bit of cross-hatching, changing the direction of my marks, but I want the primary thrust of those marks in the background to be vertical. Oh, Thomas is asking at the hardness. This is a medium. It's a 2B. And I chose that very carefully because this is literally the only charcoal pencil I have left. So I ordered more, so I'm just waiting for them to come in. But so I really had no other option, but it's working for me. So I think if I had a softer one, I probably would be using that. But I think medium is really, it's a great kind of hardness of pencil to work with. All right, so as I work on this section here, I'm trying to be mindful of kind of the beginning and the end points of this path along here. And kind of jumping around it, because what can happen, you know, if I were to start here, for example, and try to find that path of that ice cream along there, it's really easy just to become kind of myopic in my thinking and lose sight of the overall scale and just kind of work from point to point to point and end up at exactly the wrong spot. So I need to keep in mind the entirety of that path. And so in a way, I'm kind of just jumping around, but it's an intentional choice to do that so that I keep these kind of finer details in check, and I keep the scale correct as I go. Hopefully that makes sense what I'm saying. But I've found that I get myself into trouble when I'm working, whether I'm working in charcoal or graphite, if I'm working in line, or if I'm really working on shading. But if I'm following along the contour of an object without kind of doing these check-ins all the time, then I find that I always get the scale wrong. I'll kind of start along a path, and then it won't end where it needs to end. I'll either be too short or too long with the details. So I find that I'm just kind of jumping around from point to point, constantly checking in with where I need to be in that entire path. Okay. So now I'll pull out the eraser, do some more negative drawing. And you can see there's these clumps of the ice cream. There are light sides and shadow sides to each of these bumps in here, but so I'm just kind of making some observations that might come in handy later. And as I say with really every episode, is you're going to decide for yourself how far you want to take something in terms of detail. All right. People from all over today. So welcome everybody. If you're just joining us, you can find the reference image in the description below. You can also find a link to the Drawing Together page on Artist Network where you can learn more about the show. So we meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And we draw together. All right, so what do I want to do here? I want to continue to refine this edge along in here. So I'm intentionally working in value shapes rather than line, and I think that's because to me that adds to the sense of light and form in a drawing rather than using a line. Lines are great, especially in terms of creating expression, but I want to create a sense of light in this and kind of focus on the light more than anything. So I can see I'm really wearing this down now, and I'm kind of losing that sharp point. So I can just shift to this overhand grip and work in that background. And this is where I can start to darken back up in here. So in this way, I'm contributing to the drawing, But ultimately, my main goal is just to sharpen the pencil. I may end up having to sharpen this. I'm really using a lot of charcoal on this drawing. So I've eaten up a lot of that charcoal so far. Yeah, I'll definitely have to sharpen that up. So yes, Jay Wolf is saying the same thing, spinning the charcoal. That's what I was mentioning earlier. So as you're filling in the space here, always be rotating the pencil, and that way it, you can see I got a bit of a flat side there because I had stopped rotating it. But you want to keep kind of rotating it to round it out and to keep that core nice and round. Let me see what happens. Smooth that out, and then I'm going to use my eraser again. Don't be afraid to kind of build up the drawing, wipe it down, build it up again, wipe it down. I think it just helps to unify the drawing. And adds to the richness of the whole thing. And as I'm looking at the shapes in here, I'm also thinking about, both the positive and negative space and the shapes of the light and the shadow in here. So I've kind of overcut a little bit here, but you can alternate some of these basic shapes. Thinking from positives to negatives, additive and subtractive processes here. Okay. And actually, I'm going to leave that be because this isn't bright white. There's that brown that's got some tone to it, and we're going to pull out the light on the crystals a little bit later. And then I think I need to, now I can kind of continue to work in this area here. So what I want to try to do is visualize the path where we turn from light into shadow. And visualize that path, but I'm going to use the side of the pencil here and try to think about it in terms of shape, again, rather than drawing a line. We have this little bit of a cast shadow here. And I could see some of these negative spaces in here that help to create the form. And I'm still trying to think about, just think about them as abstract shapes more than anything. All right, so as I'm going through here, these are just going to be rough. So I'm going to use the blending stump in a little bit to start to refine things a little bit more. All right, so now we have in this shadow side, or really if we look at the pie, you have three basic values. You have one value representing the light, you have this mid value representing the shadow, and then you have this darker value that represents an even darker portion of the of that shadow side. And then sometimes that's just sufficient, is just finding those three values. Light side, shadow side, and then shadow core, and then maybe add a highlight. got this shadow across here. And I have to think about, you know, with this reference photo, there's kind of a depth of field with the closest element being out of focus, the farthest element being out of focus, and really just kind of that thin space of the surface of the plate with the pie on it that's in focus. And so I can kind of force that a little bit more in this drawing by really leaving this foreground kind of unfinished and then putting more energy into the details on the pie. So I'm kind of contemplating that, but I need to bring this up a little bit more. I think I'm going to have to sharpen my pencil soon. All right, let's bring out the blending stump. So I'm going to use this to kind of, mostly I'm just kind of picking up material at this point, but I'm smoothing this out. And remember that this blending stump isn't just a tool for smoothing texture. It is an opportunity to contribute to the form. And so I try to treat it as though it's a drawing instrument, not just a tool for smoothing out texture. So I'm using the kind of the side of the pencil, and when I'm working with the marks, I'm trying to be mindful of the planes, right? So back in here you have the shadow, and it's largely a horizontal plane there. So I'm running my marks kind of horizontally, and there's a very kind of shallow kind of depth to the marks here. But if I keep them, you know, largely horizontal, it helps to reinforce the horizontal nature of that plane. And then I can change the direction here on the pie where now it becomes vertically oriented. So I like to use the side of the blending stump. And I'm thinking a lot about kind of direction. So that I, you know, if I'm leaving any marks, that it's reinforcing the dimension of the plane that I'm working on. And just like with the pencil, you're kind of rolling it in my fingers so that I'm constantly kind of addressing a new side of the blending stump. And there's kind of this cool contrast in texture between the crust and then the inside, and I want to think through how I'm going to manage that. So as I'm looking at this dark strip along here, that's the transition between the horizontal surface and then that vertical side. And you can kind of see in the shapes here that there's kind of a rounded quality. And so if I allow those marks to round at this corner, that'll help to reinforce that those dimensions there. Tyler's got to go. Sorry to see you go, Tyler. I know you said you had homework to work on, so I'll get back to that. Jack, hi, random person. Welcome. Good to see you here. If you are new, this is Drawing Together. I'm Scott Maier, and I'm with Artist Network, and where we create resources for artists. And in this show, we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Join us tomorrow with Gigi Chen. She has her Painting Together show. We work with acrylics in there. So that's a fun program. All right, so I'm starting to think through some kind of variations in value in here. And I'm probably going to need to pull out my eraser to create a little bit more variation in there, but I'm going to wait for that. Now I'm going to work on this surface plane, and I want to think again about the direction of my mark. So if you look at that surface, it gives you clues about the marks that you need to make. You know, we're shearing across the surface of the pie, and they're largely kind of horizontal marks. And so as you look at a specific region, a specific area that you're working on, really try to study what's happening. Are they, thin kind of slivers? And here we get a little bit more kind of variation as that crust kind of is cracked along in there. But I'm trying to just kind of create some form along here. And then as you work on the shadow, there's this small cast shadow onto the surface of the pie. Make those marks reinforce the plane of the pie there. So if I have marks running horizontally here, and then I change these to being vertical marks, that could disrupt things a bit and make it feel like they're actually different shapes rather than just the continuation of that form from light into shadow. So paying attention to the direction of your marks in the shadow, in those cast shadows, can be really helpful. Jack, welcome. Say you're new. Let's see. I'm glad you found this stream. I'm glad to see you're drawing along, whether you're drawing this or something else. That's really kind of the point of this show, is just for a group of us to get together and draw together, and then hopefully share your work on Artist Network. So you can find in the description below a link to the show page where you can share your work. And I see some really solid drawings. I've been seeing more of you share your work lately, which is really awesome to see. And in particular, I really like to see variations, how you've made it your own, and maybe use different materials or interpreted the subject in a different way. But I like just to kind of talk through what I'm doing to see if it's helpful for you as you're working on your own drawings. But if you do have any questions about something that I'm doing and you're kind of curious and I didn't cover it, just let me know. So now I'm kind of working in this area here, thinking about the shapes of light and shadow in this kind of ice cream side. I love the blending stump for this. So I've picked up a lot of charcoal on the tip, so it becomes a really effective drawing tool. And I find that it creates these shadow shapes really beautifully, as opposed to using the charcoal and trying to fill it in. The charcoal pencil can kind of leave some harsh marks. So in terms of creating these delicate shadow shapes, this blending stump works really well, I think. And so these edges are all kind of soft at this point. And then I can start to be selective about how I sharpen up these edges as I go along. So there's this kind of a cool section in here where you really have light on light, and really the only major distinction between the ice cream and the plate is the way that the pattern on the plate is displayed there. It kind of cuts in behind that. So I don't want to overstate that edge, but okay. Whew. Got to take a little bit of a break. Started focusing a bit, and this drawing can be, I know for me it can feel like I've just given myself an exam to take after I walk away from the drawing and my brain feels a bit shot, right? So, and I think some of you have expressed that before too. It can be a mental challenge drawing, and so what I'm doing now is just mostly I'm giving my brain a little bit of a breather before I get back to this area. So I'm moving to a spot that requires kind of less of a cognitive load, and just kind of smoothing out this area here. So that way I can keep being productive with the drawing while also giving myself a breather. don't know if that's something any of you can kind of kind of connect with, the idea of it being exhausting. But I know for me, when I was in my undergraduate, you know, it felt like I had built up an endurance where I could work for 8, 10, 12 hours a day and just feel energized by the end of it. And now I struggle with that a little bit more. So. All right, let's see, and I can move to this area. Again, kind of requires a little bit less thinking. What I need to do is I'm evaluating on the screen in front of me, and I have what you're seeing, so the overhead shot of the pie, and I need to do some evaluation. So if you haven't stepped back from your work, I think it's really helpful to do that, you know, frequently, to kind of catch, you know, any kind of major issues with regards to the proportion, perspective, composition, etc. You know, we interpret things differently when we're up close versus when we're at a distance, and I refer to it as changing the context. So flipping it upside down, stepping back, looking at it from a distance, taking a photo of it, looking at it as a small thumbnail on your phone, holding it in front of a mirror. All of those things that you do they change the context. It just kind of it gives your brain an opportunity to think about the drawing in a new way, and then hopefully highlight issues that need to be addressed. And so I think it's really helpful and healthy to do that. All right, bye, Jack. Have fun at the mall. Tyler is saying, I do have a question. How did you sharpen the pencil like that? The normal one, not the charcoal. So Glenda is here, first timer briefly. So I'm on the run. It's bringing back memories of why I loved working with charcoal. I'm glad to hear that. Well, these do go up as recordings, so come back later and you can watch the whole thing. Tyler, actually, I do need to sharpen my pencil, so I'm going to actually go through that and I'll just kind of show you how I do it. Yeah, I can do that right now, actually. It's going to make a bit of a mess down here, but so why don't I put this down here and I can put this on the screen. So I just have a razor blade that I use to kind of carve away on the pencil here. And I like to make it nice and shallow so that I can really utilize the side of it. And so I'm mostly using my thumb to push it forward. And as I kind of, I've learned over the years that it can break really easily right here, right at the point, right when I shift from carving the wood and I move on to the charcoal portion. And so that's when I start to kind of slow down there. And I just keep rolling it in my fingers here to get more of it. And then I can kind of slowly shave this down. Now in this case, I don't think I need to really make it too sharp. I can use the drawing itself to sharpen the pencil. But the key is, like, with each stroke, I'm gradually rolling the pencil here so that I can for the most part keep it round. And you could save the bit of charcoal here and use that as a charcoal powder, you know, if you want to kind of sprinkle it on. It's a great way to tone a background and get a nice smooth area, but I'm not going to do that now. Put that down here. So now I have a bit more of that, and I can make it even sharper by just working in some of these other areas, continuing to fill in kind of these broad areas. Again, I like this overhand grip for that purpose because I can, I can continue to sharpen the pencil. So, yeah, and Tyler, you're saying that I've tried doing that, but my knives are too jagged. Yeah, it's having a really sharp and new razor blade is really kind of the key. And I get really lazy with that, so I'll just start breaking a bunch of charcoal pencils and get frustrated with myself instead of just getting a new blade. That fixes the whole thing. So I'm trying to, I try to catch myself and remind myself, just get a new blade, and that'll make any of those breakage issues, it'll minimize that. So I'm looking at some of the subtlety in the shadow side here. A little bit darker in this as we kind of tuck in under the plate, get a little bit of bounce light in here, and then do some negative drawing with the shadow being darker than the plate on this side. Okay, so now I kind of have that sharper edge, and I'm going to use that to I'm not sure. There's a question coming in about the missing corner. So now, like, I'm going to be going through, now that I have my kind of sharpened pencil, I'm going to go through and sharpen up this even more. So I'm going to start on this side. Need to bring up the full-size reference photo. And I think what I need to do is I need this side to be a little bit lighter. So before I use an eraser, I'm going to see if I can just lift a little bit with my palm. That might be a little bit too much. But what I'm looking for is this alternating sequence between light and dark here. So, we have the pie is darker against that shadow. Then we have light. This is darker. And then this part here is darker than the background. And so I think I want to kind of increase that contrast a little bit. So I'm going to pull up some of that value in here and then smooth out that transition. And I've kind of lost that edge, but I can reestablish it now, because now I can go, I can come back into this area and add some of that finer detail. And this is going to be now darker against that slightly lighter background. And there's really kind of this sharp edge up in here that I want to maintain. And this rag paper that I have here, and the use of charcoal, it doesn't kind of lend itself to the kind of detail you can get with graphite. So if you're working in graphite, you have a harder material that can really get sharp edges. I find that charcoal works better for me when I focus on really a sense of light rather than kind of sharp detail. And if I wanted sharper detail, I kind of would have used a kind of a smoother surface. So I'm just looking at this edge here, trying to sharpen it up. And so you have this kind of dark band, but it's not a solid black. It's dark, and then you have even darker areas where you have those little pits. So I think what I need to do is let me lift up some of this. Use the blending stump to kind of create these kind of irregular kind of jagged spots, and then again thinking about that rounded portion. That's the transition between those two planes, and that can help really create that sense of form if I get that edge right. And then we're going to use the mechanical eraser to really pull out those little sugar crystals there. So this is a dark band, but it's not as black as I can go, and I want that on purpose, because I need to be able to go a little bit darker to get the darker pits in there. Okay, so now I can come back in here. really just kind of focusing on that edge. And I like to use the side of the pencil rather than the tip because it creates more kind of natural looking textures and marks. Kind of more irregular. Get it from a distance. All right, I think that's working out okay. And in here, we have really kind of a sharp focus that I can create a harder edge in here. I still want to use the side of the pencil as much as I can. So kind of thinking working from the center of that form up to the edge rather than from the edge in. All right, I'm happy with that. Happy with the sharpness there. Let's see, coming under here. This is just a real light pressure to create some definition in this side. And there's some bounce light coming in here that I notice especially along these pieces that I want to address a little bit later. And so before I focus on that bounce light, I want to get the shadow shapes in here really dialed in. And then here we've got these kind of vertical marks here, kind of transitioning from that crust into it. So now I'm trying to think through the structure of those pieces of apple in there. So looking at this, for example, there's two planes. There's this one and then that plane. And so changing up the direction of my marks to suit the angle of that plane. Coming across here. There's another kind of shadow, kind of triangular shadow form in here. And under here, there's more of a distinct shadow. And again, trying to remind myself to start from the center of the form and work out to find the edge of it rather than outlining it. Once I start to outline things, then I run the risk of it kind of fracturing the subject. It makes it feel like it's not all part of one solid form. Michelle saying, I'm glad you're showing us the detail mark making. Excellent. If there's anything else that you kind of want me to kind of talk through, or if you have suggestions on how you manage things, I'd love to hear those. See how you might be doing things differently, because there's a million ways to draw. The term that we use here is that marks are thoughts. So drawing is an opportunity to kind of record our thought process as we discover an object. And because of that, we each find our own way through a drawing, through a subject. All right, this is really kind of an interesting form in here. And I can feel myself trying to make sense of this, and it's tricky. And so what I'm relying on is really just an understanding of these as abstract forms, shapes and values. And if I get those shapes and values right, I'm going to trust that it comes together effectively in here. All right. All right, Michelle saying I had to start earlier so you could keep up. Okay, oh, excellent. Like I said, these go up as recordings, so if you miss anything or if you need to pause it, you'd be able to do that later. And on Artist Network, we have all of the old episodes as well, and so you can watch those recordings. All right, so I'm going to be using my eraser in this area, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to come back into that once I've kind of addressed some of these other areas. I think what I want to do now is work on this side. I'm kind of working my way from the outside in terms of those subjects. Now I might, let's see, what do I want to do here? This edge is going to be really tricky to get these finer details, but I think it's necessary to create this sharp edge here. So I want to be careful as I make these marks. I don't want it to be a hard line, and so as a result, I'm not doing it all in one continuous thing. I'm taking these multiple kind of little stabs, working on a little bit, and then kind of feathering out away from the edge, so that I don't have a hard, kind of too visible of a line. Actually, how does it work if I go from the back edge working into it? That sharpens it up a little bit. And I think having some variation, some lost and found edges can be helpful as well. So if that's a term that you're unfamiliar with, a lost and found edge means that as you follow along the contour of a subject, the edge of a subject, that the hardness of that edge, how clearly that edge is defined, is constantly varying. So it seems to kind of come in and out of space. And that can create a sense of light and atmosphere to have that. If the edges are too hard and consistent all the way through, it can feel unnatural, because that, really aligns with how we view things. If we think about the field of vision that we have, 99% of that is out of focus. We're only able to sharply focus on a very small portion of our entire field of vision. So we're really good at making sense of things that are out of focus. And it can start to feel actually a little uncomfortable if an entire area is in sharp focus. So, all right, so I want to do this, kind of work on that plate. So I'm trying to be mindful again of the plane. So as we look across here, it's a horizontal surface, and these marks are really close to one another. And then I can kind of lightly define that edge. So if I'm putting a line in here, but I'm trying to make it really, really subtle, so that you kind of sense that sharper edge without really seeing that line. So here's a great opportunity for that lost and found edge. I can just let that be kind of soft and atmospheric, kind of letting it get blown out by the light there. Tyler's back, welcome. It's hard to draw when you're hungry. Who's saying that? Champagne supernova. Yeah, I hear that. I know for me, like sometimes you just get into it and realize that it's been hours and maybe not have eaten. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself when you're working. All right, so some of these areas here in the ice cream section are a little bit dark, but what I'm going to do is kind of block them in with the pencil, and then I'll refine it a little bit more with the blending stump. So I've got that basic shadow shape, but then there's areas within each of these shadows where there's variations, and that's what really brings these shadow forms to life, is observing those subtle variations. So thinking about it in terms of both positive and negative space, so you're looking at the form that you're rendering as well as the space around it. And then, and looking at this as a form here, thinking about it as a spherical form essentially. So there's a kind of a wall that faces us here, and as we move up, we're gradually wrapping around to the point where we're looking at the top, we're looking actually across the surface, and the scale and the shape of those marks changes when you do that. So these become really thin and more horizontal across the top, and then they start to open up as we come down that surface. So I'll just switch back and forth between the blending stump and the charcoal, and that still is a little bit, I feel like that contrast is a little bit harsh, so I'll just lift up with the kneaded eraser. And if you just press and lift, it'll lift the charcoal without smudging it. So if you're worried about kind of losing detail, just try to really just press and lift. And then as I'm looking down at this area, there's generally this horizontal, kind of thrust of the plate there in the composition. And I can create a differentiation in this space by then dropping these vertical marks back in here. And I'm actually going to make that a little bit, I'm kind of enhancing that a little bit more from the photo, just to help pop that edge of the plate forward a bit more. So how's everybody doing on your drawing? Your drawing's coming together okay? Michelle's saying you're working on toned charcoal paper. Nice. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I was just working on some toned paper. Actually, working on this dog for next week. That's going to be on toned paper. So charcoal with black and white charcoal on gray toned paper. So that'll be coming up next week. And I considered it for this, but I don't know, I guess I just didn't feel like it. So sometimes that's the only real reason, is I just felt like working in charcoal for this one and not on the white paper and not the toned paper. So yeah, so this gets really dark in here. I feel like that contrast is a bit too strong. So I'll just press and lift, pull some of that out. All right. So now let me get up back to this one. Actually, what I think I want to do now is let's pull out this mechanical eraser and see how it works. So I see somebody says that this drawing looks like dog crap. So okay, that works. And well, I hope that. So if you are Phase Mongrel, I think you should totally draw along with it. That's awesome. Let's see. So what am I going to do here? Okay, so I think I want to start along that back edge. And so you can see I've got this mechanical eraser, just kind of spins it around. And see how it does in terms of the detail. Just kind of dropping it down along that edge. And before I drop it down, I'm trying to be careful about the placement and think through. I'm going to force myself to look at the subject more. Because I know it's kind of an instinct for me to just kind of go for the drawing, and forget about the subject and just start making marks. And what I want to make sure is that I don't create, again, these evenly spaced marks that feel unnatural. And I don't want to have these strong lines really kind of break up that edge. So it's a very light touch with this. I'm letting the eraser really do all the work. And I'm still using the kind of the basic overhand grip of any pencil that I might be using. And if you don't have one of these erasers, you can achieve really the same effect with a rubber eraser. This one's kind of worn down a little bit, but just kind of light, quick vibrations with that sharp edge can sometimes get you what you need. And I still want to be thinking about that plane across the surface of the pie, so I don't want to be I don't want to create like evenly distributed marks across that surface, because then that'll work against the perspective. And there's sections in here where things are clustered a little bit more, and if I squint my eyes, it helps give me a sense of where I need to lift off even more material. Let's see. I'm trying to think about these as kind of horizontally aligned marks to work with the surface plane of that pie. So this is my first real time using this. I used it a little bit in the preparatory sketch, so this subject is the first time I really used this mechanical eraser, and it's kind of fun. And I know a lot of colored pencil artists that work with use these materials here, but and so by pulling out a little bit more along that edge where we have a strong contrast between light and then that dark edge, that'll bring that edge forward and actually help push things back a little bit more. So I can use this to sharpen that edge, but now I'm increasing that contrast back there. And so what I might need to do is then tone it down a little bit, so I can still have that sharper edge, but not as strong of a value contrast, if that makes sense. All right. Michelle's asking, would this cause a hole in the paper? I don't think so. I mean, I guess you could. This is a pretty heavy rag paper, and I'm really just using very light pressure on this. So, if I apply any more pressure, it might stall out the eraser. So as I'm working in this area, though, sorry, got a little distracted there, but yeah, I don't think it would make a hole unless you really bear down. I think it would kind of stall it out if you ever got to that much pressure. But as I'm working in this area, there's a little bit of tone in that area of the ice cream, and I can see where the light sides need to be. And I'm trying to erase out kind of more from the center of that shape than right up along that edge, and that will hopefully create kind of a sense of roundedness to that area. And there's some tone on this paper that's just not going to lift off, and that's okay. All right. Maybe what I need to do is kind of work back in here. And I'm really thinking about this as more like a pencil than anything. Very light touch, but the same kind of thinking as when drawing with a pencil. And then here along I'm going to pull out what's cool about this eraser is that it's a USB kind of charger, so I can just plug it in and it'll charge it up again. So I just erased a little bit more out of the front. I'm going to let the sides of that front lip of the plate stay kind of soft, so I can increase that contrast and pull this front portion forward. Hopefully help create a sense of that side's being round. Yeah, so give that a shot. I was really kind of impressed by that eraser. Like I said, I'd never used one of these before, but it is a lot of fun. So if you don't have one, you know, it's worth checking it out. All right, so now I want to really finish this side off. I've got, you can see it's all in shadow, and then I've got a range between kind of a lighter shadow and kind of darker areas, but I want to crisp it up a little bit, and I need to kind of reinforce the the reflected light a little bit. So now I'm looking at some more of the kind of the finer details, the angles and lines that I'm seeing in these areas. And I want to try to make it feel like it's relatively glossy. There's a shine to it, especially in this area where the fruit is. So let's see. Just checking here. I just want to make sure I'm not missing any questions here. Welcome everybody. FaZe Mongrel, looks like you're new, so welcome. I'm not seeing any questions, but if I'm missing anything, please shout out. It's one of those things that sticks with me. We'll sign off at the end of the episode, and a bunch of questions will come in, and I'm like, I wish I had addressed that. That was a great question, and so I do want to make sure that I address them. And it's or just comments. How do you do things differently? Because I don't want to kind of create the impression that this is the only way to draw. This is just the way I do it, and I like to see and learn from other people and see how they do it. All right, what am I doing here? This blending stump has been well used, and it's starting to kind of fall apart here a bit. All right, what do I want to do? I'm mostly just kind of filling space, trying to figure out what am I going to do now? Like, what's next? I know this isn't done yet, but I'm having a hard time coming up with a plan. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm noticing the subtle change in marks along that crust and then the fruit, right? So I'm trying to change my marks, making them kind of more irregular and kind of squirrely in the crust areas, and then get a longer, more fluid in the fruit area, in hopes that starts to suggest something about the texture. All right, so I think I do need to pull out some more of that bounce light. I'm going to use the Kneaded eraser, and you can really kind of shape it down into all sorts of forms. This is what's missing right in here, is this light coming off this bit here. I have to admit, it does remind me a little bit about being at the dentist, which I'm not sure how to feel about that when I use this mechanical eraser. But actually, and there's a little bit right in here. There's a little light that's catching right in there that helps to define that edge. Kind of a halo of light. Okay, sorry, back to this. I'm going to use my Kneaded eraser here and kind of shape it. I'm just kind of pressing and flicking with it in this area, and trying to see what kind of shapes there are. Like, one of the things I like about a Kneaded eraser is you can do stuff like this. You can kind of crinkle it up, and then kind of roll it on the page, and it creates these kind of irregular marks that feel kind of naturally formed. And I just want to make sure that it's not getting too bright, because one of the things that it's really easy to have happen is to overstate the reflected light, so then it becomes too strong, and it kind of competes with the highlight. We lose the overall sense of form. There's a little bit of light that comes down under here too. So I'm not too concerned with matching these marks specifically one-to-one with the reference photo, but I want to get them generally following the same kind of shape and flow that I'm seeing in these areas. And I want them to feel natural and irregular. And right this edge here. Actually, I'm going to use my rubber eraser here to kind of sharpen up this edge a little bit, because that becomes a little bit more visible, seems to catch the light some. So sharpen that. How are we doing on time? Oh, it's only an hour and 20 minutes, so not too bad. Oh, Nathan just asked a question. How long did this take? So we started at 3 p.m. Eastern, 1 o'clock my time. I'm out here in Colorado. You know, it's been about an hour and a quarter total drawing time. And we'll keep going. I think, you know, this is about where I stopped with the preparatory drawing. Greg is saying you still prefer the Tombow Mono Zero eraser. I still need to pick that up. That sounds awesome. Mary is saying the side of the pencil for defining an edge. How does that work? Mine still looks like more of a smudge. So if you're using the side of the pencil, which I like to do a lot, it really helps to have kind of a round core. And so that's why it's important, if you're kind of filling in an area like this, that you're constantly rotating the pencil so that you're rounding it out. You're not getting flat spots. But if you just use a very gentle touch, you can create some really fine marks using the side of the pencil. And then I'm constantly rolling as I go to get to a new edge. So if I keep it flat and move along, what that's doing is it's flattening out that core, and it's gradually going to create wider and wider marks that are going to smudge more. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. I should sketch Jelly the YouTuber. I feel like I don't know what that means. that's what Nathan is asking. I'll have to look into that, see what that means. There's a lot of great stuff out there on YouTube. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm trying to be really careful with kind of the detail and being selective about where to drop in marks. And I find it's more effective to kind of create dots and dashes across the surface rather than a continuous line. Let the viewer's mind fill in those gaps. What that does is it excites the mind a bit more. It gives the viewer's mind something to do, and that can get exciting. And if we make things too explicit, too clear with sharp detail, and it can start to actually become boring. There's nothing for the brain to really figure out. So as I'm working across here, I'm just thinking about little bits and pieces of fine detail. And especially along this edge, I don't want that to feel too consistent. I want to break up that edge. So as you follow along from left to right, it's constantly changing. And as I drop in these darker values here, if I can create them using vertical lines, those vertical lines contrast against that horizontal edge, and again, that pops that edge forward. what I want to do is I need a bit of a sharper edge, and in order to do that I need to sharpen my pencil, so I'm going to work in this area in here. And that actually, by using the side of the pencil with this overhand grip, it gives me an opportunity to sharpen the pencil a little bit. And then come back in here. And I just find that using the side of the pencil, it creates marks that feel more naturally formed. It works better for texture than using the point of the pencil for me. Because when I use the point of the pencil, it kind of encourages me to draw lines and contours. And again, those are things that confuse the viewer's mind. And this modified grip, so I wedge the pencil between fingers, between at the base of the fingers, and then I can secure it with my fingertips. That allows me to use the side of the pencil and then just kind of roll it up to get some detail when I need it. So where I lifted up some of the highlights, it starts to create a structure of light and shadow within that texture side. And I can reinforce that now by going into the shadow side. I've got the highlight here, now a shadow side. If I go into that and drop in some additional shadow, it just increases that contrast slightly, and I can control the texture that way. I can make it either a more shallow texture or a deeper texture. But at this point now, rather than using the reference photo to figure out where I need to make these marks, I'm using what's happening on the page to reinforce that texture. So where there's light spots, I'm going to treat that as a highlight now and kind of darken in some of the spaces around it to make them more distinctly shadow forms to create that texture. Right in here, there's a bit more kind of detail, more sharpness to those edges. And trying to think about that form, think again about the planes that I'm working on. There's the overall plane of that slice of pie, but then within that you have each of those individual apple pieces that has its own kind of orientation and plane, changing the direction of the marks to suit that surface. I think I need to sharpen this up a little bit more. And this edge needs to be a little bit sharper. All right, so how's everybody doing? I think we're nearing the end here. I mean, right at this point, I'm really just kind of nitpicking, right, and figuring out these kind of details that aren't necessarily contributing to the form. It is making a more finished drawing. But one of the things that I think about when I'm working is, we've had this question before, is like, how do you know when it's done? And for me, one of the criteria that I often use is to reflect on what am I doing? Am I contributing to the form? Am I really expressing some sort of understanding about the subject? Or have I really kind of understood it as far as I can, and am I just filling in space? Because then once I get to that point where I'm just filling in the space, then that becomes my cue to just stop and put it down. But if I feel like I still need to understand the form better, there's still something to learn more about the subject, then I'll keep drawing. I think I'm getting close to that point right now where it's just about done. So how's everybody doing? Michelle is wondering if you're allergic to charcoal. That would be something to consider. I've never heard of that, but I know for me, when I was doing a lot of charcoal drawing, I had to wear a mask just because of the charcoal dust. Now this is a pretty small drawing and it's laying flat, and so the dust is settling downward away from me. But when I was working vertically on larger pieces, I had to be really careful with that because I started breathing in charcoal dust. So be careful with that. Paul is saying you're using a Tombow mono as well. That's awesome. I definitely have to check that out now. Okay, I think what I need to do, this still feels a little bit unfinished, but I don't want to get too much. I want to make sure that that front edge maintains its integrity in the focus, because that's creating that depth. But I do need to add a little bit of sharpness in here. And so now that I've kind of erased out some highlights on those sugar crystals, I'm going to let that be my guide to figure out where I can add kind of more sharpness. And so I'm just taking this scrap piece and I'm using that to sharpen the pencil. This is a piece of crescent mat board. There we go. Now I've got a sharp point. And what I want to avoid doing is outlining forms here. Think about the shapes, and actually what I need to do is think about them as being horizontal lines, so then it just reinforces that horizontal plane. So even if I view a path that might be kind of more vertical, I'm going to create that by using these subtle horizontal marks. And I can sharpen up some of these edges along in here. But I need to evaluate that. I want that edge to be broken. If it's too sharp of an edge, it's going to pop forward, and I can lose some of that depth that I've been trying to achieve. So a lot of this just feels like I'm just making little dots on the page, but that can be really helpful, I think, if just a small dot can make a whole area seem to come to life. And again, just using those little bits of white that I erased out using the eraser as kind of a guide, dropping in a little bit of shadow on the side of it to help create more of a sense of texture there. So again, just kind of moving horizontally across, so I want to reinforce that plane, but being careful about where I drop that line. I'm not making long lines, just a few little dots here and there as I move kind of horizontally across that surface can be enough. I think I do want to sharpen up this edge here. And then this is a little bit fuzzy in here, so I want to try to think through what's happening. When I give something in the front here some texture, I'm going to enhance that a little bit more from what I'm seeing in the reference photo. I think this is just kind of too dark and solid, so what I'm going to do is lift this up with a kneaded eraser and then come back in and create some more variation, and that feels a little bit better. So sometimes it's just a subtle change can make all the difference in the world and really make something feel like it's coming to life. Okay. Whew. Nathan is asking, could you use marker? Is it going to look bad? A marker would not work well with the charcoal, but I've never actually tried it, so I think if I were to give that a shot, what I would want to do is isolate the layer. And so maybe like a strong fixative on top, and then see if that's sufficient to then lay marker on top of that, or fix this and maybe kind of varnish it or do something again to create a barrier between the charcoal and the marker. Nathan's asking, when will I be live again? So I meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. And we're on episode, what, 70, 71, somewhere around there. So there's a lot on the drawing together playlist here on YouTube, or if you go to the Artist Network page, the Drawing Together page, you can find all the episodes there. Find the subject. There's nothing kind of linear about that, so you don't have to start at the beginning. You can just kind of pick up with whatever subject you want. All right, I think I'm getting, I feel like I'm pretty much there. I don't know, anybody see anything else that needs to be worked on further? Anything that else kind of stands out? Just kind of giving it some time, kind of poking around here. Maybe I will drop in, if I work on this shadow here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in these forms, again, maintaining an understanding of that surface. So these are really like horizontal marks across there. And now we go from light over here into shadow. So when I'm making these marks here, I'm using a fairly light pressure, and I come into that shadow area and I can darken it, and that creates the illusion of transparency. That gives it a little bit more form in there. I think that's helpful. Actually, I can pull out a little bit of the reflected light, just pressing and lifting with a kneaded eraser to create some form along in here. But, all right, what do you think? L. McIntosh, could the top left part of the pie be a little bit darker in value, like right in here? Yeah, that's a good idea, because then what happened, we talked a little bit about that earlier. I darkened it in value, but by going even darker, by lowering the contrast here, it pushes the higher contrast area to this side. So before I do that, I just want to look at some of the clues there. I can reinforce the texture. So this is really just a light touch, using the texture of the paper to suggest kind of texture of that pie crust. And so that darkens it while also contributing to the texture there. That was a good suggestion there. And Joni says, I just need to add a fork. That would be awesome. I should have done that. So I found this on Pixabay. This is the reference photo that I found there. And it didn't have the fork, but I have to admit, if I did have some silverware added to this, I would be rather intimidated. So kind of sharpen up this edge back in here. How's that work? Let's see. Little harsh. It's fun working with charcoal. I've been working with graphite quite a bit lately, so shifting to charcoal is really fun, and I think it's really healthy to vary things a bit. So you may be, you may kind of specialize in graphite, for example, switching to charcoal for a little bit, and using that just as an opportunity to kind of experiment with a different medium can sometimes teach you a lot about the medium that is your strength. So if you are kind of stronger in graphite, playing around with charcoal for a while can be helpful, or vice versa. That's why I like to shake things up a little bit, is to see, what can I learn about graphite by working with charcoal. So looking at this background, it's interesting seeing it vertically in front of me. I can notice a greater differentiation in values here than when I look here. I can't see that change in value looking at it from this perspective, but with that overhead shot, I can definitely see it. So I just want to soften that up a little bit. All right. Let's see. L. McIntosh. Yes, this is a General's charcoal pencil. I like it. Works really well. I've also been using the Derwent charcoal pencils that work really well. And I just decided to use this one today. Like I said, I've been using a lot of the Derwent ones, and they've worn down quite a bit. I've got a set of their tinted charcoals that I really like. All right. And Zephy is asking if I'm still playing with colored pencil. I am. And it just further confirms that that stuff is hard. I can't. It's difficult for me to work with it. My brain just has to shift thinking about drawing in a very different way. All right. Excellent. Well, I'm glad everybody has been able to join me here. I can't wait to see your own drawings. So again, if you're joining us late, this goes up as a recording so you can follow along. I'd love to see your own drawings. There is a link in the description to the show page where you can share your work, and I am looking very much forward to seeing everybody's drawings on this one. I know the last one we did, the portrait, was a challenge, and oh man, some of you have some really strong work that you posted, and that was really cool to see. Portraits in themselves are challenging, but you handled it beautifully. Let's see. Sydney is saying maybe a couple small highlights in the filling to make it look shiny. You know, let me give that a shot. You know, so I'm going to use this eraser here, and that was who made that comment? Sydney is saying that. So like right in here, there's some really kind of distinct kind of forms, and so I'm going to erase those out. And now those are pretty bright. They're starting to compete with the highlights, but I want to see if then I'll just kind of knock them down and see how that works. So I don't these even in this reflected light area, they're not nearly as strong. But by creating kind of distinct lights like this, you know, that sharp edge suggests the glossiness of it. Make it rough there. Let's see. And then these marks in here a little bit more kind of striated. If that's a word, I don't know. Like striations. All right. So that really increased the gloss. I think a little bit too much, but if I just kind of tap it down, my hands are pretty dirty, that kind of takes the edge off of that value contrast. Yeah, what do we think of that? That works a little bit better. That's a good idea, Sydney. Thank you. Howdy from Texas, Cheryl is saying. So welcome, welcome. And then, yeah, Cheryl, I do. This is Cheryl is just saying about the kneaded eraser, or the electric eraser. Yeah, this subject is the first time I've used it. So I did a preparatory sketch using it, and I really enjoy it. I don't know as if I'd use it for everything, but something like this, it's a lot of fun to work with. All right. So I think I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to hang on for just a few more seconds to see if there's any other additional questions, but I want to thank you all for joining me. It's been awesome. Thank you all for the great suggestions and ideas here. I can't wait for next week. So I started this guy here, this dog. So this is going to be on toned paper. I'm going to come back in with some light highlights. So that's going to be next week, and I want to finish that out. RANX Nova, I can definitely give you a shout out. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. See a lot of new names today, so thank you. I'd love to hear where you all found us. check out some of the old episodes. Subscribe. Like I said, we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow, Gigi's going to be with painting together. That's going to be a fun one. I'm really looking forward to that. So that should be up on the channel. You'll be able to see that same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, painting in acrylic with Gigi Chen. Awesome. More toys, Paul is saying. Yeah, let me see. I kind of was thinking about the pet one because I've seen a lot of artists being posting kind of pet portraits. Seems to be a thing that's happening this time of year. So that might give you some ideas for gifts if you want to do a pet portrait. JC is saying, I'd never much used charcoal and was not sure in the beginning of your sessions, but have learned to really like it. That is awesome to hear. We mentioned it before that charcoal is kind of one of those things that people have generally stronger feelings about. You know, some people really hate it. Some people love it. I love it in particular because it gives me that full range of values. But it does, you have to work for the details a little bit more with it. L. McIntosh, Artist Network newsletter. Yes, subscribe to the newsletter on Artist Network and you should get notifications there about new things. You know, I've got all the old episodes that are up on the subscription, so Artist Network TV subscription. You can find them all in there if you're a subscriber. Yes, it is time for a snack. Wendy is saying your ugly duckling drawing took a long time to develop. Yes, so the ugly duckling stage, if you are struggling and you're frustrated with your work, every drawing goes through what I call the ugly duckling stage. And Wendy is saying that it took a long time to develop. So hopefully it's emerged from the ugly duckling stage. But just be kind to yourselves, be patient. Drawing, it's a never-ending journey. And if you've walked away learning something from it, then that's all you can really ask for. So, all right. Nathan Matson, I can definitely give you a shout out. Thank you for joining us. If this was your first time with us, welcome. And I hope to see you again next week. So I'm going to sign off now. Thank you again. Have a great weekend. See you next Wednesday.